The first time I saw her, she was standing at the edge of my driveway, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed like she was appraising a used car she didn't want to buy. Karen Marston, president of the Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association, was, in her own mind, the guardian of order. Her hair was cut in a sharp, chin-length bob that seemed engineered to swing with precision when she turned to scold someone. Her voice carried the kind of confidence that came from never once questioning whether she might be wrong. I had been in Pinecrest for less than 24 hours. My moving truck was still parked at the curb when she marched up, heels clicking against the pavement. "Welcome to Pinecrest," she said, her smile as brittle as glass. "I trust you've reviewed the HOA guidelines thoroughly." It was more command than question. I told her I had. I even thanked her for stopping by. That was my second mistake. The very next morning, I found a neon orange paper taped across my front door. Violation notice number 001. The offense? My trash bin had been visible from the street for 2 hours before pickup. I laughed, tore it down, and tossed it. Surely, this was just a little overzealousness. But over the next 2 weeks, the infractions multiplied. My grass, according to Karen, was a 1/4 inch beyond acceptable length. The security cameras above my garage were too visible and unwelcoming to visitors. My truck, parked in my own driveway, was not in harmony with the neighborhood's aesthetic because it wasn't painted a community-approved color. I began to notice that Karen's visits weren't random. She always appeared when I was outside, washing my car, trimming the hedge, carrying groceries. She'd glide over, clipboard ready, eyes sweeping across my property like a hawk scanning a field. She didn't inspect, she hunted. One Saturday, I caught her leaning over my fence with a tape measure, checking my lawn height without knocking or announcing herself. I walked out to confront her. "Oh, don't mind me," she said, scribbling something on her sheet. "Just making sure you're in compliance. It's easier if I check personally rather than send you a letter later." Easier for her, maybe. For me, it was an intrusion. That night, I sat at my dining table with a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. If Karen was going to weaponize the rules, I wanted to know exactly what I was up against. What I found was interesting. Half of the violations she'd cited weren't in the rulebook at all. They were interpretations, or in some cases, outright fabrications. At the next monthly HOA meeting, I showed up with a folder full of photographs, measurements, and printed excerpts from the bylaws. When Karen called me out for my multiple compliance failures, I read the actual rules aloud, line by line, proving she was wrong. The room fell into an awkward silence. Karen's smile didn't falter, but her knuckles whitened around her pen. After the meeting, she didn't bother with the thin layer of politeness she'd used before. She muttered "troublemaker" under her breath as she passed me, and her visits became less about pointing out violations and more about asserting control. She'd linger on my sidewalk, jotting notes, or stand in front of my house, as if willing it to reveal some offense. Then came the letter, a final warning for consistent disregard of community harmony. It was vague, almost taunting, as though daring me to push back again. I had expected Karen to try and fine me into submission. I had expected passive-aggressive notes, public shaming at HOA meetings, maybe even a few anonymous complaints to city code enforcement. What I didn't expect was how far she'd go. The incident that truly ignited the war between us didn't happen in daylight. It happened in the dead of night, long after the neighborhood had gone still. But even before that night, I could feel something building. A sense that Karen wasn't content to just govern from her HOA throne. She wanted control that went beyond the bylaws, beyond the property line, beyond anything I had imagined. Standing in my driveway that first day, I couldn't have guessed that the woman with the clipboard would soon try to cross the threshold of my home without permission. But looking back now, the signs were all there. In her clipped tone, in the way her gaze lingered on my front door like she already believed it was hers to open. And when she finally tried, she discovered that some doors don't just open with a key. Sleep came lightly in Pinecrest after Karen set her sights on me. Every creak in the house, every rustle outside, carried a subtle question. Is she at it again? Still, even I wasn't prepared for the sound that ripped me from sleep that night. It started with the faint, metallic rattle of my doorknob turning. Then came the pounding. Bang, bang, bang. Wood groaned under the assault, and my dogs, Duke and Raven, exploded into a frenzy. Their claws scraped against the hardwood as they hurled themselves toward the front door, snarling with a ferocity I'd never heard before. Heart pounding, I glanced at the clock. 3:07 a.m. Who is it? My voice was sharp, loud enough to carry over the barking. No answer. Only the distinct, grating sound of a metal key scraping inside the lock and failing. Adrenaline surged. Someone wasn't just knocking, they were trying to come inside. I snatched my phone and repeated the demand, this time with more force. The response made my stomach twist. It's Karen. Your porch light is out, and you've been ignoring my notices. I have a master key. I'm letting myself in to conduct an inspection. The sheer absurdity hit me in a wave. This wasn't an emergency. This wasn't about safety. This was about control, and she had decided the middle of the night was a perfectly reasonable time to exercise it. Her so-called master key clause existed in the HOA bylaws, but it was meant for true emergencies. A burst pipe flooding a home, a fire while the owner was away. Nowhere did it say a dark porch warranted entry at 3 a.m. What she didn't know was that her key wouldn't work. Months ago, after her increasingly invasive visits, I had changed all my locks. Frustrated, she began to kick the door. Each blow vibrated through the frame, drawing growls from the dogs so low they seemed to rumble up from the floor itself. Duke, all 90 pounds of muscle, threw his weight against the door, while Raven snapped at the air, teeth flashing in the dim light. Karen, step away from my house right now, or I'm calling the police. I shouted, hitting record on my phone. Her reply was shrill, words tumbling over each other in rage. Something about non-compliance, emergency authority, and immediate fines. It was less an explanation than a tantrum. The situation was no longer just infuriating, it was dangerous. A lone woman, convinced she had the right to enter my home uninvited, standing in the dark while two trained dogs were seconds away from breaking through the thin barrier between them. I moved closer to the door, keeping it locked, my camera still recording. You are trespassing, I said, each word deliberate. Leave now. Silence followed, broken only by Duke's heavy breathing and Raven's restless pacing. Then came the sound of retreating footsteps, quick and angry. A faint muttering trailed behind her as she disappeared into the night. I stayed there for a moment, pulse still racing, until the dog's barking subsided into low, alert growls. I knew this wasn't over. For someone like Karen, retreat was never a concession, it was a regrouping. The next morning confirmed it. There, folded neatly into my mailbox, was a formal HOA violation notice accusing me of willfully obstructing a mandatory inspection and maintaining unsafe exterior lighting conditions. It would have been laughable if not for the fact that she had crossed a legal and personal boundary. This was no longer a petty feud over lawn height or driveway decor. She had tried to enter my home without consent. That was a line I could not and would not let her cross again. I uploaded the video to a secure drive, labeling it with the date and time. My first stop would be the local police station. My second, the HOA's own community email list. If Karen wanted to make this public, I was ready to oblige. That night, as I double-checked the locks and the dogs settled at their usual spots near the door, the memory of her voice still echoed in my mind, the entitlement, the certainty that my home was hers to access. It wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was anticipation. Because now, this wasn't just about defending my property. It was about showing Karen and everyone else in Pinecrest that the rules she bent to her will could be turned against her. She had come for me in the dead of night. I was going to answer her in broad daylight. By morning, my anger had cooled into something sharper, strategy. Karen's midnight stunt wasn't going to be just another petty skirmish. It was going to be the turning point. At the police station, I handed over my phone and let the officer watch the video from start to finish. He didn't even try to hide his raised eyebrows when Karen's voice rang out, declaring her inspection and rattling the lock. That's trespassing, he said plainly. And at that hour, She's lucky her dogs didn't take it further. A formal report was filed. The officer suggested I share the footage with my neighbors. I'd already been planning on it. Back home, I drafted a brief, emotionless email. No rants, no accusations, just a link to the unedited video and the line. This occurred at 3:07 a.m. last night. I thought the community should be aware. I hit send to the Pinecrest Estates mailing list. The reaction was immediate. Within an hour, replies began trickling in, first privately, then publicly. People weren't shocked by the behavior in the video. They were relieved someone had caught it on record. A retired teacher down the street wrote that Karen had once entered her backyard uninvited to check the condition of her fence. Another neighbor recounted being fined for unauthorized holiday decor because he'd left a wreath up 3 days past Christmas. Someone else had been written up for having unapproved patio furniture, a gift from his late father. I began to see the pattern. For years, Karen had operated like a petty monarch, and no one had challenged her because she controlled the rules and the board that enforced them. But now, her authority had a crack in it, and I just handed everyone the crowbar. That evening, a knock sounded on my door. It wasn't Karen. It was Mark Jensen, the HOA treasurer. He stepped inside and lowered his voice. I've been waiting for something like this. People are fed up. There's talk of calling a vote to remove her. He explained the process. A petition signed by at least 25% of the homeowners would trigger a special meeting. At that meeting, a simple majority could vote to strip Karen of her position. If you're willing to push it, I can get you the signatures, Mark said. But you should know, she'll fight back. I didn't hesitate. Then we make sure she can't win. The next 2 days were a blur of clipped conversations at doorsteps, hushed exchanges in driveways, and a steady stream of signatures on the petition. People didn't just sign. They unloaded years of pent-up frustration. By Friday, we had double the number required. The special meeting was set for the following Wednesday. Word must have reached Karen quickly, because the very next morning, a printed President's Notice appeared in every mailbox. It was a rambling defense, part denial, part justification, claiming she had been acting in the best interest of community safety and that my video was taken out of context. It might have worked if another neighbor hadn't stepped forward with their own footage. During a small gathering that Saturday, a man named Carl pulled out his phone and showed me a clip from his Ring camera. Karen at midnight, trying the latch on his backyard gate while holding a large ring of keys. The timestamp was just 2 nights before she'd shown up at my place. Carl agreed to share it with the entire neighborhood. When that second video circulated, whatever support Karen had left crumbled. By the time Wednesday arrived, the community hall was packed. Karen sat at the head table, her usual tight smile replaced by a stiff mask. I could see her eyes scanning the crowd, searching for allies and finding only folded arms and cold stares. Mark opened the meeting with the petition. He read the charges: repeated violations of privacy, misuse of HOA authority, and unauthorized entry attempts. Then, without ceremony, the vote began. It wasn't close. The tally was read aloud, 42-3 in favor of removal. Karen's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The gavel came down, and just like that, her reign was over. Still, as I walked out into the night, I knew this wasn't the end. Losing the title wouldn't erase her need for control. And if I'd learned anything about Karen Marston, it was that she didn't surrender quietly. Her power was gone. But her resentment? That was just beginning to show. Karen didn't vanish after the vote. For the first week, she still strutted through Pinecrest with the same brisk stride, as though the gavel's crack had been nothing more than background noise. But her authority had evaporated. Neighbors no longer paused to greet her. Conversations hushed when she passed. The clipboard disappeared from her hand. What remained was her glare, sharper now, stripped of the veneer of politeness. The new HOA president, a soft-spoken but firm woman named Linda Alvarez, wasted no time addressing the chaos Karen had left behind. The first meeting under her leadership opened with a review of the bylaws and a proposal I had written. Any board member who enters private property without explicit owner consent except in a verifiable emergency, is immediately removed from the board and fined $5,000. Linda called it the Karen clause. The name stuck. It passed unanimously. The next order of business was collecting all HOA-issued master keys. They were kept in a locked metal box during meetings, each tagged and logged. When Karen's key was produced, I could almost hear the room exhale. It was like the final symbol of her control being surrendered. Still, even stripped of her position, Karen lingered. She prowled the sidewalks, muttering to herself, sometimes stopping to stare at my house from across the street. The dogs would notice her first, lifting their heads from where they lay, a low rumble starting in their chests. I refused to be intimidated. My security cameras were always on, my locks triple-checked. If she wanted a war of nerves, I was prepared to win it. The police report from the night she tried to enter my home had moved slowly through the system, but persistence paid off. 6 weeks later, a uniformed officer knocked on Karen's door with a summons. The charge: criminal trespass. The evidence: my video, time-stamped and undeniable. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but word spread quickly. Even those who had once tolerated her began keeping their distance. Pinecrest's queen had been reduced to a cautionary tale. 2 months later, the moving truck arrived. No farewell parties, no warm send-off, just a quiet, steady stream of boxes carried out under her scowl. A neighbor said she was headed to a gated community across town. I thought that was the last I'd hear of her until an email landed in my inbox from a contact in that neighborhood.
Saw your video.
She applied to be on their HOA board. Didn't get past the interview. I almost laughed. Even stripped of power, Karen was still trying to claw her way back to a throne. But she'd underestimated how far her reputation had traveled. In Pinecrest, the changes stuck. The Karen clause became more than a rule. It was a warning etched into the culture of the community. HOA meetings became shorter, calmer, and focused on actual maintenance instead of petty policing. People planted flowers in colors they liked. Holiday decorations stayed up as long as they wanted. I kept my porch light bright every night, a silent beacon that my home was my own. Duke and Raven lounged at the window, occasionally letting out a bark when a stranger passed, but their days of furious midnight defense were over. One evening, months after Karen's departure, I stood on the porch as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. The street was quiet except for the faint laughter of kids riding bikes. For the first time since moving in, I felt something Pinecrest had promised on paper, but never delivered until now: peace. Yet even in that stillness, I carried the lesson Karen had burned into me. Unchecked power, no matter how small the stage, grows in the shadows until someone drags it into the light. And sometimes that someone has to be you. The video from that night remains on my drive. Not because I need it for protection anymore, but because it's proof that one moment, one act of defiance, can shift the ground under an entire community. Karen had come for me believing she held the master key to my home, my compliance, and my silence. In the end, all she managed to unlock was her own downfall. And if she ever tries to return, well, the locks are still changed. And the dogs still remember her scent.